Yeah, so most of what I'll be saying about feminism and animal rights will be drawing upon the work of Carol Adams, who wrote The Sexual Politics of Meat, and also The Pornography of Meat and Neither Man Nor Beast, Feminism and the Defense of Animals. What she discusses is the absent referent. And this is basically a mass term that's used to hide the subjectivity of the person that it's referring to. So, for example, she'll say that meat is an absent referent, or pork or beef, for example, that's an absent referent. Even something like chicken, because it doesn't refer to the individual animals. And how that works is, like, an individual cow, that's an individual, or an individual pig or chicken or so on, but when thousands of cows are turned into hamburger meat, then there's all the individuality of the creatures that went into that is erased. And we also see absent reference used with to refer to women and to other minorities. Can you think of examples of that?
Or like racial slurs, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good example. Or another one might be how the term girl is used to refer to grown women, even though we don't use the term boy to refer to adult men. And also, like, during slavery, for example, like, a person just became a slave, like, their individuality was lost completely.
Well, chicks. Talk about chicks.
Yeah, that's another very good example, and it's also a very animalized term used to describe women. And now I'll go over how sexism intersects with with animal use industries. For example, vivisection is not feminist at all because male animals are typically used for experiments because it is thought that the reproductive cycles of the female animals will interfere with the outcomes of the experiments. It's extremely gendered, as much as science is, and many feminists have written a lot about that. And also, I believe that the meat, dairy, and egg industry are unmistakable parts of what feminists call rape culture, and that's a term that was coined in the 1970s to refer to a society that trivializes and normalizes rape and sexual assault. Here are some images. Female animals, as many of us know, are the most exploited in the food industry. They're all of them are repeatedly forcibly inseminated. Their consent is not taken into account at all. They have their babies taken away. The mother cows. The mother cows, their babies become veal, and the same with like the other animals. Like, that's a picture of the sow stalls. That's a internet meme that I like a lot. Who made your eggs today? It's a picture of some random human, and then it says newsflash, it wasn't this guy, it was them. And that's an example of the exploitation of female animals. And also the bodies of the female animals are manipulated genetically and through other means to produce milk or eggs until their bodies deteriorate or quite literally fall apart. Because, for example, the dairy cows, they get very painful infections of their udder, and sometimes they'll be killed immediately because of that. And also the hens, the laying hens, they'll experience prolapse where their innards will literally fall out because their bodies are so spent from laying so many eggs at a rate that's not natural for a chicken at all. And also another part of rape culture would be the way that many slaughterhouse animals in slaughterhouses and factory farms are sexually abused by frustrated workers. Can you think of any examples of rape culture like that apply to human women? Women who have been sexually assaulted, they'll seek help on college campuses and they'll be told that they're lying. Yeah, and rape culture is also based upon the assumption of the father, who would also be the patriarch or the king in a hierarchical society, his entitlement to the bodies of those who are deemed to be lower than him, and we hierarchically rank humans above animals, but we also make hierarchies of humans within the category of the human. So, for example, white people over people of color, men over women, straight people over people who aren't straight, able-bodied people over disabled people, and those who are on top are seen as entitled to the bodies of those who are on the bottom. Animals are seen as lower than humans, and we're basically seen as entitled to. We see ourselves as entitled to rape them. And now I'll go into the sexual politics of meat. In her book, The Sexual Politics of Meat, and also in The Pornography of Meat, Carol Adams argues that, like women's bodies in the porn and the sex work industries, the bodies of animals are dismembered and objectified. For example, in porn, the women there are just purely for the male gaze, and they'll just be kind of hacked apart into different body parts. Like, you won't see the whole body of the person, and the body parts are fetishized. And Carol Adams says that the language used to describe women in porn and animals that are turned into meat are very similar. For example, both women and animals are cut up into breasts, legs, thighs, racks, which refers both to the ribs of a pig and to a woman's breast. And this is exploited in advertising. We can see Manny's has great legs right there. And in her book, Adams provides many examples of how advertisements for meat and animal products, in comparison to many other food products, they have a tendency to be extremely sexualized. They'll use references to women's body parts, and even what's particularly disturbing is images of sexy cartoon animals asking to be eaten. The sexy bit is a bit unsettling, and also it's worth noting that they're called, people have nicknamed them restaurants, but restaurants that hire attractive young female waitresses, and they profit off of the objectification of women. An example would be the restaurant chain Hooters. Not coincidentally, they predominantly feature meat. Can you think of any examples of where you might have seen this kind of advertising, like just in the community? Sure.
As far as fast food joints go, I know a lot of celebrities bandwagon, like they go on to these like commercials where they're sexualized and they're selling like a burger that has like meat.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, definitely.
So that's like one example I can think of.
Yeah, so these are just some examples of very, very sexualized advertisements for meat and animal products, and of course Lady Gaga's meat dress. Here are some more examples. Cook wrote a book called 50 Shades of Chicken, and it was supposed to be a parody of 50 Shades of Grey, and it shows like a muscular male chef tying up the chicken and eating the chicken in a very sexualized way, and it's particularly disturbing. A barbecue shaped like a sexy pig, and the picture that's on the left is one that I find extremely unsettling. It was a pig dinner that was done completely by female chefs, and in this image, the photographer is taking a picture of one of the chefs in a leotard, pretending to rub the rump of the pig, and what's interesting about this one is that in the article I took it from, Carol Adams posted a comment saying that it was part of the sexual politics of meat, and the woman in the picture responded by dismissing Carol Adams by saying, "Oh, it's a feminist trying to save me from the sexist meat industry, and it's my choice." But what she doesn't realize is that she's basically enacting a male fantasy that is predominant in our culture, and she's just assuming she lives in a cultural vacuum. And she also doesn't recognize the subjectivity of the other that's being completely violated there. She doesn't realize that they just lost their lives. Yeah, so now I'll go into disability rights and animal rights. A lot of the material that I'll be talking about is drawn from an essay that I really like by Sunara Taylor. It's Beasts of Burden, Animal Disability Studies and Animal Rights. And I'll start by going over what ableism is and 3 different models of disability. Ableism is a term that was coined to refer to discrimination against disabled people, and also to the belief that disabled people are inferior to able-bodied people. And in disability studies, we talk about 3 different models of disability. So like in pre-modern times, disability would be understood through a religious lens. Like, for example, it would be seen as a karmic punishment or a punishment by God for the sins of your parents if you're born disabled. Can you think of examples where you might have seen people having those beliefs in real life?
People that have been with AIDS, they've being referred to as like a punishment from God, like that.
That's a very good example. Yeah. But in the Victorian era, that model was largely replaced by medical understandings of disabled people. And while in some ways that was better for disabled people, in other ways it was just as horrible and even worse. Because in the medical model, like, disabled people aren't just seen as like freaks or just whimsical curiosities. They're seen as something that should be eradicated. They're seen as something that is in need of a cure. Something that's an inferior version of something else that should be gotten rid of, something to be poked and probed, and labeled and put in institutions. It's quite interesting because before the modern era, like, mad and disabled people, mad is it's a term used to refer to mentally ill people by like people in that community. It's a reclaimed term, but in pre-modern times, like, they would have been in hospitals or institutions, but there wasn't really an emphasis on curing them. When we get to the Industrial Revolution, there was an emphasis put on curing these people, which actually wasn't very good at all, because then very coercive measures start being used. And the third model that I'll go over is the social model of disability that's favored by disabled people ourselves, and that's where disability is seen as a limitation that's constructed by society, where like a large amount of the suffering that disabled people go through is actually caused by prejudice, by a lack of accessible spaces. For example, I know U of T is horrible for accessibility. A lot of the city is horrible for accessibility. How are you supposed to get around in a wheelchair? And disabled people suffer from those kinds of limitations rather than from who they are biologically. And we're not really trained to look at it that way because we're brought up to think of disability as an individual problem. We think that disability is the fault of the individual and that the individual must fix their disability, or it's the duty of doctors to fix their disability. We don't see it as a problem that our society to a large part is to blame for. We don't see that disabled people could live much better lives if certain barriers that are disabled people's fault could be eliminated. And it's very easy to eliminate them, and also be better for all of us if they were eliminated. They can have benefits. Accommodations for disabled people can have benefits for other people as well. For example, closed captioning. Like, it's not only good for hearing impaired people, but it's also nice to have in, like, a very loud bar, for example, and curb cuts. They're not only good for if you're in a wheelchair, but also mothers with strollers. That's another good example. And yeah, okay, I'll go on to say that, in my opinion, animal rights and disability rights are the most radical of social justice movements because both animals and disabled people are seen as freaks, as non-human monsters who are completely physically and psychologically unlike us, or unlike normative human beings, and thus we see them as beings that we can't empathize with at all. They're just complete strangers, like ultimate others. And another reason that these movements are very radical is because arguments for rights of women, people of color, and gay and transsexual people have often rested historically upon favorable comparisons of such individuals to animals or disabled people. Can someone think of I'm thinking of a very particular example in the history of the gay rights movement where gay people gained more rights because they were favorably compared to disabled people in some way. Can anyone think of what I'm thinking? Yes?
When it was taken off the mentally ill, whatever tool they use for deciding whether somebody has
Yes, exactly. It was taken out of the DSM, and
Yeah.
gay people gained more rights because it was said that being gay was no longer a mental illness. But then, well, what is the other side of that? The other side of that is that oppression of mentally ill people is justified. The other side is that oppression of disabled people is justified, and also when we say that women or people of color or gay or transgender people, well, they're not animals, like they're human beings. Well, that's just, you're legitimizing the oppression of animals. That's what you're doing. And I think that these social justice movements will always be in a contradictory position if they don't recognize animal rights. And there are many commonalities between animal rights and movements for disability rights. For example, animal rights activists all agree that things like intelligence, rationality, bipedality, and your physical abilities are not criteria that anyone should base whether or not you're worthy of moral consideration on. And disability rights also rejects that idea. It rejects the idea that the value of someone is determined by any of these criteria. Many disability rights activists will also advocate for the rights and freedoms of like the most severely disabled people. And I'll be showing a series of paintings by Sunara Taylor. This one's particularly interesting. She is physically impaired and like her limbs are shortened in comparison to like an able-bodied person, and she uses a wheelchair. Like she's very physically limited. And she painted a picture of her naked body with the head of a sheep, and there's sheep body parts surrounding her like a butcher's diagram. And this fits into what I'm going to be talking about next, which is the dismemberment, both literal and metaphorical, of disabled people and how the medical establishment views and treats disabled people. And how the medical establishment views and treats disabled people can be paralleled with, as I was saying before, how the porn industry views and treats women, and how the meat, dairy, and egg producers view and treat non-human animals. And doctors both literally and metaphorically dissect disabled people, and much like women in porn, they tend to see disabled people as collections of defective body parts and behaviors, rather than as whole individuals with their own reasons for being who they are. Like often when able-bodied people look at disabled, all they will see is a body part that they deem defective, or like all they see is like a collection of symptoms. They don't see the person. Yeah, and that's how medical diagnoses are made. In her essay, Taylor also points out that both medical diagnoses and the names given to disabled people who were exhibited in P.T. Barnum's freak shows during the end of the 19th century, animalized language is always there. Yeah, here, this is a image made by Taylor of a little girl with what's called lobster claw syndrome, and other labels that are very animalized include elephantitis, the ape-hand syndrome, even diagnoses that a lot of people are familiar with, like chickenpox and goosebumps, for example. And we also see that language in the names of the freaks. For example, Otis the frog boy, Jojo the dog-faced boy, Mignon the penguin girl. Everyone knows the elephant man because of David Lynch's film. Creo the ape girl, also What Is It? Darwin's Missing Link. That one's particularly violent because it's stating that because the assumption was that white people, able-bodied people, and also humans were higher on the evolutionary chart than disabled people, especially cognitively disabled people, animals, and people of color. Yeah, and here are some animals in zoos and circuses, juxtaposed with images of disabled people who were paraded around as freaks at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. I like the contrast of the poster of Otis the frog boy with Jumbo the elephant. And there's also the chimpanzees tea party, where chimpanzees confined in the London Zoo were forced to ape human behavior, and they were humiliated that way. Here we can see the similarity between a Victorian freak show and also at the same time period the Barnum and Bailey menagerie. Yeah, they come out of the same historical context, and the freak show and the zoo and circus are both outgrowths of colonialism and capitalism. The idea of acquiring commodities, and also the idea of conquering other places and exploiting what they have and enslaving the inhabitants, bringing them back and putting them on display. Also, many people of color, like who were enslaved, were put on display in the freak shows as well, and sometimes literally in zoos. Yeah. And what's a significant comparison between the modern zoo and the circus and the Victorian freak show is that in both cases, people who believe themselves to be more normal, more complete, and superior are reassured of their normalcy, their completeness, and superiority in comparison to those who they see as abnormal and incomplete and inferior versions of themselves. Able-bodied people have a tendency to see physically and mentally disabled people as inferior versions of themselves, as failures at becoming themselves, as sometimes literally failures at becoming fully human. That's often the case. And Darwin explicitly wrote that there were no hierarchies in evolution, but the way in kind of a bastardized popular conception of Darwin's ideas, most people see evolution as hierarchical, and we assume that animals are failures at becoming us because we see ourselves as pinnacles of evolution. And when we mean that when we think that animals or disabled people are failures at becoming fully human, what we mean is that they're failures at becoming white, heterosexual, able-bodied human males. And for centuries, women have been seen that way thanks to the thinking of Aristotle. Yeah, this is another painting that I really like, strange but true. It's a banner that would be used in a Victorian freak show on top of an image of a cow on a butcher chart that's chopped into various pieces. Yeah. There are also many ties between eugenics and the history of animals. Eugenics is, in a nutshell, an attempt to eliminate disability, to eliminate people who are seen as undesirable or inferior, also to perfect the human body, to eliminate impurities, to decide who's worthy of living in the world and who isn't, as Hannah Arendt would put it. The most, the ultimate example of that to many people would be the Nazi era. It's worth noting that pedigree dog shows became extremely popular during the heydays of eugenics during the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Pedigree dog breeding, as many of us know, is an incredibly abusive industry. Breeders will purposely select for animals who have more exaggerated appearances, and they suffer a lot due to their anatomy and various genetic diseases that are extremely painful. Breeders also will often have puppies who don't fit the breed standard euthanized. And we see eugenics practiced all the time in the meat and dairy industries as well, and the egg industry, where the cows and the pigs and the chickens are genetically manipulated to produce more milk and eggs and to gain more weight. And they will become so large that they will die of heart attacks. And people in the meat industry will often talk about breeding super cows, super pigs that gain ridiculous amounts of weight, and you have to think about how painful that would be for the individual animal. And also farm animals are genetically tweaked in other races.
I just want to add that you're absolutely right. A few of us just came back from farm sanctuary and we're talking about that. But of course, when you have a sanctuary, we want to look after the animals for their longevity. They have not been genetically modified for longevity, as you say. They've been
Exactly.
To put on, huge breasts for the chickens, and
Yeah.
their legs couldn't support. Their legs would break when they get arthritis, but they're killed before that anyway.
Yeah,
Exactly. So
exactly.
that's a challenge for us here in all
Yeah.
sanctuaries.
Yeah,
where
I've heard a lot about that.
They
It's
come and they're
incredibly
okay
sad.
for a while, but then we have to be very careful about their diets and just how they're looked after.
Yeah.
They do grow to the industry standard, which actually is unhealthy for them, but under their conditions it wouldn't matter as they'd be slaughtered. We want to keep them as long as possible till they die of old age, ideally, of course.
Yeah, for example, I know about the pigs and the chickens where they're genetically modified to gain enormous amounts of weight, but when people rescue them, they will still not live out their full lifespan that they would have naturally, because they gain so much weight that they die prematurely or they have to be euthanized. Yeah, and also we see animals genetically designed in order to be more quote-unquote environmentally friendly, like the EnviroPig, for example. And that's a technological fixed solution of the most outrageous kind, because instead of telling people what they should be doing, which is to eliminate meat from their diets, to eliminate animal products from their diets, and to fix the enormous amount of environmental degradation caused by those industries that way, they're targeting the animals, which is completely ridiculous. And also another parallel between how animals are treated in the food industry and eugenics as it was applied to disabled people and racialized people is that when animals on factory farms are born disabled, or when they inevitably become disabled because of the extremely poor living conditions, they'll immediately be killed. They're referred to as downer animals. And in that I see a parallel with what the Nazis did to disabled people, where they were killed because they were seen as worthless to the society. They were seen as burdens, and this shows us how capitalism views disabled humans and non-humans in general. The disabled factory farm animals are seen as worthless to the market. They can't sell them, and in a very similar way, disabled humans are seen as worthless to the market because they're assumed to be not capable of working, to be incapable of working, incapable of producing and consuming as quickly as possible, which is essentially mandatory under neoliberalism. And eugenics also intersects with vivisection because vivisection is usually done with eugenic aims, and it's touted as a cure for disability. The idea of curing disability is extremely problematic because for one, it's a way of saying that you prefer disabled people to no longer exist, and it's a way of like eliminating an entire population of people. And also, the way that we focus on cures as opposed to accommodations for disabled people is very political because it's very political because for one, the cures that are touted wouldn't be available within the lives of most disabled people, so disabled people aren't being benefited at all, and also the problem is located solely within the individual. So in a nutshell, I don't think that you can be for disability rights and support vivisection. And in terms of eugenics in animals, this is a picture of a cartoon that was published in the late 19th century. It says, "Piebald Possibilities, a little Australian Christmas family party of the future." And the term piebald that we use to refer to animals with certain coloration, that is a very racist term because in the late 19th century that was used to refer to people of mixed race, and it was used to refer to what was seen as racial impurity. And this cartoon, as we can see, it reflects fear of people of color, and it reflects the hysteria of white people surrounding the preservation of their whiteness. And of course, I compared and contrasted it with the New England Kennel Club. Here are some paintings by Sonny Taylor of the downer animals, which I was talking about a moment ago. Yeah. And I'd like to end with a note on what we call evolutionism, this hierarchical thinking. Like, for example, one question that I often think about is what it means to be given a certain label in the society. For example, the label of developmentally disabled. It means not reaching the full extent of your development. Like in terms of animals, we see them as not developing to the point that we have. It's a misinterpretation of Darwin, in which normative human beings are believed to be the pinnacle that all other organisms ought to strive towards. So both disabled people and non-human animals are seen as one end of the spectrum that isn't very good. And we assume that evolution is hierarchical and linear, when it's really not that way. And it's ridiculous to say that one organism is more evolved than another. I'm just as evolved as a fruit fly. And in this cultural context, both disabled people and non-human animals are seen as stifled in their physical and mental development.